legit.
Who are you?
I work with Spider-Man.
You work for Spider-Man?
I work with Spider-Man, not for Spider-Man. New plan.
Adam Smith and most economists today believe that markets create efficient outcomes, but the opposite of that, even Adam Smith pointed out that there are times when the markets fail and government action is required. So where in our economy is best to have market, where in our economy is best to have the government is an argument. We don't really have the kind of worker empowered thing that Karl Marx envisioned anywhere in the world, but difference between government control and private control. In capitalism, we believe that consumers should get that maximum choice. In Russia, you didn't have 6 brands of toilet paper in the Soviet Union that you could pick from. You had one brand of toilet paper and one kind of toilet paper that you could pick from. There's a lot less consumer choice in that socialist world. The socialist answer to that is that one of the things about capitalism, one of the driving factors of capitalism is that it gets consumers to buy things they don't need. It gets consumers to spend money and waste money and buy stuff that they really don't need, that's not good for society kind of things. The fundamental things about capitalism, one of those is that Adam Smith believed, and we'll talk about this a lot in the next chapter, that transactions that happen in a market are win-win, that transactions are voluntary. If a consumer goes in to buy something and the business wants to sell it and they come up with a price and everybody walks out, they're both walking out happy. Best Buy is happy to sell you that Nintendo Switch and you're happy to buy it. It's a win-win. So this idea that capitalism makes consumers buy things that don't provide them utility, Adam Smith would go, it's voluntary. It's their choice. They're not making you do anything. The joy of capitalism, again, includes the fact that hard work and innovation should be rewarded. If you spend a lot of time working on something and work really hard and get really good at it, you should get rewarded for that. If you come up with some new idea, you're sitting in your dorm room going, hey, I can't search the web. I need to. And you go, and you sit there with your roommate and you go, and you invent this new thing and you go, hey, what are we going to call this? Well, let's call it Google. What do you think? Google. Well, you can become a billionaire. In a socialist world, you invent Google because it's good for society. And you're not really going to get stuff for inventing Google. So why do you spend your time? Maybe you don't. Okay, so there's all of this. What's the right answer? What's the good part? Most economists, again, come down on the side of free choice, markets, recognizing that those things require competition and information and all sorts of things that don't always exist, and we admit that. So what's the right balance? Where's the right answer? Again, good topic for this class. Okay, just again, hammer this point, make sure that we're clear on what all these pieces are. A capitalist would say that inequality is necessary in the system. That if everybody gets paid the same, if we just pass a law in the United States and says every single human being in the United States who has a job gets paid $50,000 a year. Okay, well, you're going to take the job that requires the least amount of effort and the least amount of work and right? And why do you care? And why do you put pride in your job? We get positive incentives from the fact that there is inequality. Okay? That's part of the capitalist ideal, whether you like that or not. In the socialist way of thinking, they're going to say, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. In other words, you should work as hard as you can for everybody else, for society. It shouldn't just be about you. You should see that society needs help and that you give it everything you've got. And that the people who need are the people who get. Again, socialism is going to say that there's winners and losers in markets, that things are not even, that there's no balance between the business and the consumer and the business and the worker, and the owners of the capital can exploit the other folks in the system, where capitalists would say, as long as there's good competition, as long as there's a lot of competition in the system, competition will prevent that negative outcome. Okay? And we understand, we're going to talk in this class about what happens when there's not competition. Capitalists also are going to point out that governments are inherently inefficient because they don't have these incentives that are positive. Instead, they have incentives that are negative. They have negative incentives because, again, if I make the same amount of money whether I work hard or don't work hard, why am I going to work hard? Socialists would say, hey, a socially conscious society is going to ignore those negative incentives. They're not going to see the individual incentive, their self-interest. They're going to operate on a socially conscious level, and so they do have positive incentives. It's to make society better off. Okay? You need to think about you and your self-interest, private interest, social interest. What's your interest? Let's go back and run through our world. Okay? Scarcity. The fundamental property of economics is that there's scarcity, that people's wants exceed our resources. There is always scarcity. Scarcity forces us to make choices. Scarcity creates choice. We have to choose. We're limited by time and money and everything else, and we're going to have to make choices. Those choices create trade-offs. We're giving up X so we can get Y. We're giving up going to Disneyland so we can study for that class. Or we're giving up spending time with our family so we can spend time with our significant other. Whatever it is, we're making trade-offs, and they're not just about money things. Everything we do in life, we're constantly making trade-offs. Are we playing, animal, whatever, and hanging out on our island? Or are we reading a good book? What are we doing? Life is a trade-off. Okay? These trade-offs create benefits and costs. The gains we get from doing it, so you decided not to hang out on your island, you decided to read a book, the benefit of that reading the book is the joy of reading the book. Now, part B of this happens. We gave up hanging out on our island. We gave up whatever we had to do to read that book. That's our opportunity cost. Whatever we give up, that's the cost of whatever we chose to do. Now we're going to we've made hopefully a rational choice. We make these rational choices by comparing costs to benefits. And actually, we make rational choices by comparing cost to benefits at the margin. At the margin means thinking about one more or one less of something. So we don't watch the same movie over and over again because we enjoyed the movie. Every time we watch that movie, we probably enjoy it a little less. We have already seen it 10 times. We already know everything that's going on. We probably enjoy that movie less. If we eat pizza every night, pretty soon we're going to get tired of pizza. It's not that we don't like pizza, it's that we don't want more of it. So rational choice comes from comparing benefits and costs at the margin. The benefits and costs of more of something. What are the benefits and costs of more? I'm going to choose to read that book if I find a really good benefit to cost ratio of reading more. I might enjoy over time hanging out on my island more than I enjoy benefits and costs of reading, but as time goes on, there are going to be points where the advantage of more time on my island has kind of deteriorated. I'm a little tired of that, and now I'm going to spend some time reading a book, and a day or two of doing that, I'll be recharged, and I go hang out on my island again. Okay? Tied to all this is our incentive system. Incentives affect these choices. So when we give people positive or negative incentives, that affects the benefits and costs at the margin, affects the choice they're going to make. So if I put a special tax on going to the movies and I don't put it on going to the park, that encourages me to go to the park and not go to the movies. So all these things are tied together: benefits, costs, scarcity, choice, rationality, margin, incentives. One of the cutesy things that economists say is there's no such thing as a free lunch. Sometimes we stick an ain't in there and say there ain't no such thing as a free lunch, and that gets referred to as Stoffel, the pronunciation of the first letters of all the words. But either way, this idea that nothing is free is important. When someone says to you, it's a free, let me buy it. No, it's not. You have an opportunity cost. You could have done something else. So people say, well, college should be free. Okay, let's think for a second. Number one, you're still going to spend a great deal of time and effort getting a college degree. That does not make college free. Number two, it turns out that, of course, if something doesn't have a price, and making college free doesn't actually mean that it's free. It means that it's zero price. The money price that you pay is zero. It would mean that people who don't really maybe even want to go to college, but certainly wouldn't normally go to college, all of a sudden are going to go to college because it's free. Where they might have been better off going somewhere else or doing something else or becoming a plumber or, a chef, they end up in college because it's free. The other side to that, of course, is that somebody is still paying for it. So if it's free for you, that means somebody else is paying. When you get out of college and become that somebody else who's then paying for everybody else to go to college, you might not want to pay for that. What's happened in college is that states used to pay most of the cost. Okay? If you go back in time, and in fact, if you go read Adam Smith talks about the fact that going to school benefits society. Think about that. We train someone to be an accountant. We train you to be an accountant. That means accounting firms and businesses can hire you to do accounting, and they don't have to train you. You go through K-12 education, and you can come out and you can read and write and do math. That means businesses can hire you, and they don't have to train you. If you get your economics degree and you know how to do statistics and you're really good at analyzing things, the hotel in town will hire you knowing they don't have to train you. So it saves businesses. What happens in colleges saves businesses a ton of money. Economically speaking, therefore, it's rational that they should pay some of their taxes to go to the colleges to help train these people who are going to become their employees. Does that make sense? When the 80s were going on, here in Nevada, the state legislature paid about 82 to 85% of the cost of a student going to college. Now the state legislature is paying maybe 40% of the cost of going to college. How did that happen? Well, the feds started increasing and providing financial aid. The more federal financial aid there is, and the more student loans there are, the state transferred the cost of college from its own taxpayers to the federal government and the federal taxpayers. So in this whole sequence of events here, nothing is free. Everybody's paying one way or another. There are costs and benefits. And what hasn't happened, and what maybe needs to happen, is the federal government, the states, the businesses, the students, everybody needs to get on the same page and figure out what the right way to do this is. Again, there is nothing that is free. If students don't have to pay for school, that means somebody else has to pay more for it. What's happened over the last 40 years is that students have had to pay more and the taxpayers have paid less. And the state taxpayers have really paid less, and the federal taxpayers have actually paid more. So you put all those pieces together, where are we? What's the right answer? What does whatever? But understand that there is nothing that is ever free. All right, tied to that, some words. Marginal benefits and marginal costs. We make rational decisions on the margin. That means we make good decisions when we think about the benefits of more of something and the costs of more of something. Marginal benefit is the benefit of more. Marginal cost is the cost of more. So we're weighing marginal benefits and marginal costs. The benefits of more with the costs of more. Or, alternatively, can actually be the benefits of less and the costs of less. So if we're cleaning up pollution, the marginal benefit comes from the benefit of having less pollution, and the marginal cost is the cost of having less pollution. So it can be less, it doesn't have to be more, but it's always a change from where we are, more or less of something, benefits and costs of more or less. We use this word marginal economics a lot, and it always means more of something or less of something. And if you're wondering where that word comes from, it's a math thing. And if you love math, then be an econ major and you can find all the secret stuff out that we don't tell you. Principles. Some important ideas to think about as we do this. Positive and normative. If you start out a study and you go, hey, poverty's bad, we need to figure out what to do about it, that's normative. That means you started out with a value judgment. So normative economics starts with value judgments. If you say instead, hey, I want to study income. I want to study how people at different income levels live. I want to talk about... If you're looking at something without making a judgment about it ahead of time, you want to investigate it and find out what it is. That's positive. Now, if you're a sheriff, what you don't normally do is say, Bob must have done that. I'm going to go get Bob. What you're supposed to do is say, let's get the evidence and find out who did this. If you jump to the conclusion that Bob did it, now you're normative, and there's a good chance you're going to come up with the wrong answer. If instead you start by gathering evidence and finding out what went on, that's positive, and you have a better answer. So we like to do things where we don't make value judgments, where we don't start out with a judgment that the government's good or bad, poverty is good or bad. It's this whole good or bad thing that gets you into trouble. We want you to start out thinking about what you want to investigate it and see what goes on in that world. Okay? Related to this and some of the issues that come up with this is this whole issue of cause and effect. Just because two things happen at the same time does not mean that one caused the other. Okay? So just because, prices went up and GDP went up and three other things went up doesn't mean any of them caused the other. Okay? Cause and effect. If you go outside and you listen to the crickets, you'll discover that the crickets chirp faster in the summer than they do in the winter. What's the cause and effect? Is it the bright sun? It turns out that if you do a scientific study, you discover that crickets are in fact temperature sensitive, and they chirp faster when the temperature is higher. But you can't just assume that one cause or the other cause is it without the temperature. We've had the same thing in the whole coronavirus and what drug affects the coronavirus. 98% of the people who get the coronavirus are just going to get better without any treatment. So if you give a whole bunch of people a drug and 98% of them get better, you don't go, hey, yay, 98% would have got better without the drug. What you need to do is show that people who wouldn't have gotten better without this drug now get better because they're on it, or people get better faster, or right? You have to prove something. And to prove that, you have to not show that it does X, but show that it does X better than not using it. Cause and effect. Okay? In economics, we have these things that we call models. Models are simplifications of the universe. We're going to do things like supply and demand, which is an economic model. Models are not meant to be realistic. Models are meant to make good predictions. In fact, we like simplified models, simple version of the world that's accurate. The simpler it is, when it predicts well, then we're getting good answers, and it's not hard to figure out. So supply and demand is a very simple model that frequently makes really good predictions. And because of that, we can ignore the simplicity of it because it makes good predictions. We have to understand the assumptions behind it and understand why sometimes it's not going to give us a good prediction. But where it does, it's a very simple and efficient way of getting an answer, which we like. Why would you want to be an economist? Well, let me give you a couple of reasons. Number one, 5 years out of undergraduate school, econ majors and engineering majors make the most money. Number two, economics is fun. Economists get to analyze things, look at things, sit around. We have people who work at the casinos in town. What do? They try to figure out why people gamble the way they do, what their behavior is. How do you get someone to play more often? How do you get They're doing all these really interesting and exciting things where they have to think and try to figure out experiments and how the world works, and it's exciting. If you want to be a lawyer, it turns out that econ majors have the highest average scores on the law school aptitude test that you have to take to become a lawyer. Economists do exciting things. Economists get paid well. Economists work for just about any business in the world. There's a reason why they might have an economist running around. And flat out, it's just fun. Let's move on.